Sometimes, the ones who leave first are the ones who hear the truth before anyone else. The town of Hollow Creek had always been quiet in a way that felt earned, the kind of quiet that settled gently over weathered rooftops and gravel roads like a blanket that knew every story it covered. But that morning, the silence felt different, heavier, as if something beneath it was holding its breath. Even the wind moved carefully, slipping between the old pine trees without its usual whisper, and the birds, the ones that usually traced the sky in restless loops, were nowhere to be seen. Ethan Cole noticed it the moment he stepped out onto the worn wooden porch of his small cabin just past the edge of town, his boots pressing into the cool earth as he paused, listening not for a sound, but for the absence of one, the kind of absence he had learned long ago not to ignore. At 40, Ethan carried himself with the quiet steadiness of someone who had spent years learning how to read what others overlooked, his broad shoulders relaxed but ready, his gray-blue eyes scanning the treeline with a calm that came from experience rather than ease. Beside him, Rex, his 6-year-old German shepherd, stood still in a way that didn't belong to routine, his ears angled forward, his body alert not with tension, but with focus, as if he were listening to something just beyond the edge of human reach. Ethan rested a hand lightly on the dog's back, feeling the subtle shift beneath the thick fur, a quiet signal that something in the world had moved out of place. You feel it too, don't you? He murmured, his voice low, more a habit than a question. Rex didn't respond with a bark or a growl, only a slight tilt of his head toward the dirt road that curved away from the town and disappeared into the thinning woods beyond, and that was enough. Down that road, just past the last mailbox with peeling paint and a crooked flag, a shape moved slowly through the pale morning light, a mother dog, thin but steady, guiding a small group of puppies with careful, deliberate steps. There was nothing frantic in her movement, no panic, no chase, just a quiet urgency that felt older than fear, and the puppies followed her without hesitation, their small paws pressing into the dust as they kept close, as if they understood something they could not yet name. Ethan narrowed his eyes slightly, watching the way she never once looked back toward the town, not even when one of the smaller pups stumbled briefly before catching up, and something about that detail settled uneasily in his chest. Animals wandered all the time, strays came and went with the seasons, but this felt like a decision. Rex took a step forward, then another, his gaze fixed, and when Ethan didn't move, the dog glanced back at him, just once, his amber eyes sharp with quiet insistence. It was a look Ethan had learned to trust more than any map or memory. All right, he said under his breath, pulling his jacket tighter against the cool air, let's see what she's trying to tell us. They moved together down the road, boots and paws falling into a rhythm that felt familiar, almost automatic, as the town of Hollow Creek remained behind them, still and silent, as if unaware that something within its borders had already begun to shift. And as they crossed past the final fence line, where the land opened into a stretch of dry grass and scattered stones, Ethan felt it again, that quiet pressure in the air, not a sound, not a movement, but something deeper, something waiting. Sometimes, the world didn't announce its changes with noise or warning. Sometimes it simply let the ones who were paying attention notice first, and that morning, it seemed, the animals had already decided it was time to leave. The dirt road stretched farther than Ethan remembered, bending gently as it slipped between low hills where dry grass brushed against his boots and whispered faintly with each step, yet even that whisper felt restrained, as though the land itself had decided to stay quiet. Ahead, the mother dog continued at the same steady pace, never rushing, never hesitating, her path deliberate in a way that made it feel less like wandering and more like following something unseen. The puppies kept close, their small bodies moving in uneven rhythm, occasionally stumbling over loose stones but always finding their footing again. Guided not by sight but by trust, Rex moved beside Ethan with a different kind of focus now, his nose lifting slightly into the air, drawing in the scent of something that did not belong to the morning, something faint but persistent, like metal left too long beneath the sun. Ethan noticed it a few steps later, a subtle change in the air that did not match the open land around them, a thin, almost invisible trace that settled at the back of his throat and stayed there. He slowed, glancing toward the horizon where the land dipped slightly, revealing the outskirts of an old industrial site that had not seen use in decades, its rusted structures barely visible against the pale sky. Hollow Creek had grown around it over the years, turning its back on what used to stand there, letting time bury its edges beneath weeds and silence. Ethan had passed by it before without much thought, just another forgotten place in a town full of them, but now, as he watched the mother dog lead her puppies in that exact direction, the memory of it felt different, sharper, like a detail he had missed the first time. Rex stopped suddenly, his paws pressing firmly into the ground as his ears lifted higher. His body angled slightly toward the distant structures, and for a moment he did not move at all, only listened. Ethan followed his gaze, narrowing his eyes as he tried to catch what the dog already sensed, and then he felt it, not as a sound, but as a vibration so faint it barely registered, a low, steady presence beneath the stillness, like something far below shifting in a slow, measured rhythm. It was not enough to hear, but it was enough to notice. Ethan exhaled slowly, his mind reaching back through years of experience, searching for a pattern, for something familiar, and though nothing came clearly into focus, the unease settled deeper. The mother dog did not pause, did not turn, she simply kept moving forward, crossing the invisible line where the open land gave way to the neglected edge of the old site, and one by one, the puppies followed her across it. Ethan stepped after them, feeling the ground change beneath his boots, firmer in some places, hollow in others, as if the earth itself carried memories it had not yet released. Rex moved closer now, his shoulder brushing lightly against Ethan's leg, a silent reassurance, or perhaps a warning. It was hard to tell. They continued in that quiet formation, man and dog trailing behind another who seemed to understand something they were only beginning to sense. And as the rusted outline of the abandoned structures grew clearer, Ethan realized that whatever had unsettled the morning was not something approaching from the outside. It was something that had been here all along, waiting beneath the surface, unnoticed, until something small and instinctive chose not to ignore it. Sometimes, the first sign of truth was not noise or chaos, but the simple act of leaving before anyone else realized they should. The closer they moved toward the abandoned site, the more the air seemed to settle into something heavier, not thicker in a way that could be seen, but in a way that made each breath feel measured, deliberate, as if the land itself required permission to be disturbed. The rusted structures stood ahead like forgotten sentinels, their metal frames bent slightly with age, edges softened by years of wind and weather, yet there was something about them that refused to fully decay, as though whatever purpose they once held had not entirely left. The mother dog slowed her pace as she approached the outer edge of the site, her steps becoming more cautious, her head lifting slightly as she scanned the ground ahead, and for the first time since Ethan had noticed her, she paused. The puppies gathered close around her legs, their small bodies pressing inward, sensing the shift without understanding it, and in that moment, the stillness deepened. Rex stopped as well, his body angled forward but held in place by something instinctive, his ears sharply focused, his breathing quiet but steady. Ethan took another step, then another, feeling the ground beneath him change again, the dry firmness giving way to something uneven, patches of soil that felt hollow beneath the surface, subtle dips that did not match the natural flow of the land. He crouched slightly, pressing his palm against the earth, and for a brief second, he thought he imagined it, a faint tremor, so light it could have been mistaken for the echo of his own movement. But when he held still, it came again, rhythmic, distant, and too consistent to ignore. Rex let out a low sound, not quite a growl, more like a warning held carefully in place, and he stepped forward, moving past Ethan toward a section of ground where the grass grew thinner, where the soil looked disturbed in a way that time had tried to smooth over but had not fully erased. The dog lowered his head, sniffing with precision, then lifted one paw and placed it firmly against the earth, holding it there as if marking something invisible. Ethan followed, his gaze narrowing as he studied the area, noticing details that had not stood out from a distance, a slight discoloration in the soil, a faint outline beneath the surface that suggested structure rather than randomness, lines too straight to belong to nature. The mother dog watched from a few yards away, her posture alert but not afraid, as if she had led her puppies exactly where they needed to be and was now waiting for something else to happen. Ethan reached down and brushed away a thin layer of loose dirt, revealing the edge of something beneath, not rock, not wood, but metal, weathered and dull, its surface marked by time but still intact. He exhaled slowly, the realization settling in not as a sudden shock, but as a quiet understanding that unfolded piece by piece. Rex tapped the ground once. Then again, his focus unwavering, and the faint vibration beneath them seemed to respond, not louder, not stronger, but clearer now that Ethan was paying attention. It was not random, it was not the shifting of soil or the movement of water. It carried a pattern, subtle but deliberate, like something repeating beneath layers that had been meant to hide it. Ethan straightened slightly, his eyes moving from the metal edge back to the surrounding structures, the abandoned buildings, the silent towers, the empty windows that faced outward but revealed nothing within. Hollow Creek had turned away from this place long ago, had let it fade into the background of memory, but standing there now, Ethan felt the weight of something that had never truly been left behind. Sometimes, the past did not disappear, it simply waited beneath the surface, quiet and patient, until something small, something instinctive, chose to uncover it again. Ethan remained crouched for a moment longer, his fingers still resting against the exposed edge of the metal as if the contact alone could confirm what his instincts had already begun to piece together, and beneath his palm, the faint rhythm continued, steady and deliberate, not mechanical in the way of a machine, but not entirely natural either, something in between, something that carried intention without revealing its source. He withdrew his hand slowly and stood, brushing the dust from his fingers while his eyes traced the faint outline hidden beneath the soil, lines too clean, too measured to belong to chance, suggesting a structure buried just below the surface, sealed not by accident, but by design. Rex stepped back half a pace, then circled once before returning to the same spot, his movements precise, almost practiced, as if he were mapping the space in a way Ethan could not yet see, and when the dog paused again, his head tilted slightly, listening. Ethan felt that same quiet pressure return, the sense that something below them was not only present, but active in a way that defied the stillness above. The mother dog remained at a distance, her posture unchanged, watchful but calm, her puppies now resting close together in the dry grass, their small bodies finally still after the long walk, as if whatever had driven them to leave the town no longer followed them here. Ethan glanced back toward them briefly, noting the absence of fear in the mother's stance, and that detail settled into his thoughts with a quiet weight, because whatever lay beneath this ground, it was not something she feared in the way animals feared immediate danger, it was something she had chosen to avoid, something she had recognized and moved away from with purpose. He turned his attention back to the buried metal and stepped along its edge, following the faint line beneath the soil, brushing away loose dirt with the side of his boot, revealing more of the surface bit by bit, enough to confirm what he had suspected, that it was not a fragment, not debris, but part of something larger, something constructed, a sealed boundary rather than a discarded piece. The outline formed a rough rectangle, several feet across, its corners softened by time but still visible beneath the thin layer of earth, and along one side, just barely visible, was a narrow seam, a division in the metal that suggested an opening, a way in that had been closed and forgotten. Rex moved to that seam and lowered his head, his nose hovering just above it, his breathing slow, controlled. Then he lifted his paw and pressed gently against the line, holding it there as if confirming its presence, and when he looked back at Ethan, there was no uncertainty in his gaze, only a quiet insistence. Ethan stepped closer, his boots settling into the uneven ground, and crouched again, this time focusing on the seam itself, running his fingers along its length until he felt it, a slight indentation, almost worn smooth, but still there, the edge of a handle or latch that had once been used to open what lay beneath. He paused, not out of hesitation, but out of recognition, because something about the shape, the placement, the intention behind it, felt familiar in a way that did not come from this place, but from somewhere else, somewhere buried deeper in memory. The rhythm beneath the ground continued, faint but unwavering, and for a moment, Ethan closed his eyes, letting the soundless pattern settle into his awareness, measuring it the way he had once been trained to measure things that could not be seen, counting without numbers, sensing without needing proof. When he opened his eyes again, the quiet certainty had taken hold, not of what exactly lay below, but of the fact that it had not been meant to be found, not like this, not by chance, and yet here it was, revealed not by time, but by instinct, by a creature that had chosen to leave rather than ignore. Sometimes, the world did not hide its truths perfectly. Sometimes it simply relied on the hope that no one would think to look, and standing there with Rex beside him and the faint echo beneath his feet, Ethan understood that whatever had been sealed below Hollow Creek had never truly been gone. It had only been waiting for someone willing to listen to what others had chosen to forget. The metal was colder than Ethan expected when he pressed his palm against it again, not the natural coolness of earth-covered steel, but something deeper, as if whatever lay beneath had not felt the warmth of sunlight for a very long time. He shifted his fingers along the faint indentation, brushing away more dirt until the outline of the handle became clearer, worn smooth at the edges yet still intact, a quiet reminder that this had once been used, opened, closed, maintained by hands that knew exactly what it was for. Rex stepped closer, his body low, his nose hovering just above the seam, and then he exhaled slowly, a soft breath that carried a different tone now, less warning, more recognition. As though the pattern beneath them was no longer unfamiliar, Ethan glanced at him, noting the change, and it stirred something in his memory, a distant echo of moments where instinct had spoken before logic could catch up. He tightened his grip on the edge of the handle but did not pull, not yet, because the rhythm beneath the ground had shifted slightly, not louder, not faster, but more defined, like a signal that had moved closer to the surface. He paused, listening in his own way, not with ears but with awareness, letting the pattern settle into something he could understand. It was not random, it carried spacing, repetition, a structure that suggested intention rather than accident, and for a brief second, an image flickered in his mind, not clear, not complete, but enough to create a sense of familiarity that he could not ignore. Rex placed his paw gently on Ethan's boot, grounding him, and when Ethan looked down, the dog's eyes held steady, calm, as if reminding him that whatever this was, they were not facing it alone. Behind them, the mother dog shifted slightly, stepping closer by a few feet, her puppies following, their small forms pressing together as they watched from a safe distance, and there was something in her posture now, not fear, not urgency, but patience, as if she had led them here not to escape, but to witness what came next. Ethan drew a slow breath and adjusted his stance, planting his boots firmly into the uneven ground, feeling the subtle hollowness beneath him, the quiet suggestion that the earth below was not solid all the way through. He slid his fingers fully beneath the handle and tested its weight, finding resistance at first, the kind that came from years of being left untouched, but not the kind that meant it could not move. He pulled slightly, just enough to feel the mechanism respond, a faint shift, barely audible, but real. The seam along the metal line trembled almost imperceptibly, and the rhythm beneath his feet seemed to answer, aligning for a brief moment in a way that made the connection undeniable. Ethan stopped again, not out of hesitation, but out of respect for what he was beginning to understand, because this was not simply a buried structure. It was something that had been sealed with purpose, something that still held that purpose even after all this time. He released the handle and straightened, his gaze moving across the abandoned site, taking in the rusted towers, the silent walls, the forgotten paths that no one had walked in years. And he realized that this place had not been abandoned in the way people assumed. It had been left behind with intention, as if the world above had chosen distance over confrontation. Rex stepped back half a pace, then sat, his posture alert but steady, waiting. The mother dog remained where she was, her eyes fixed on Ethan, her presence quiet but unwavering, and in that stillness, Ethan understood that whatever he was about to uncover was not just buried in the ground, it was buried in the history of this place, in decisions made long before he ever arrived, decisions that had shaped the silence of Hollow Creek in ways no one had spoken about. Sometimes, the hardest truths were not hidden because they could not be found, but because no one had been willing to open the door that led to them. And standing there with his hand still tingling from the cold metal, Ethan knew that door had just begun to move. Ethan stood still for a long moment, the quiet pressing in around him as if the entire landscape was waiting for his next move, and beneath his boots, that steady rhythm continued, no longer something distant or imagined, but something present, something real, something that had been there long before he arrived and would remain long after if left untouched. He looked down again at the handle, the thin seam cutting through the metal like a line drawn with intention, and this time, he did not hesitate. He lowered himself slowly, his movements controlled, deliberate, the way he had learned to approach anything unknown, anything that carried weight beyond its surface, and he placed both hands firmly around the handle. The metal resisted at first, not with force, but with the quiet stubbornness of something that had not been disturbed in years, and for a second, Ethan simply held it there, feeling the connection between his grip and whatever lay below, the boundary between above and beneath, between what was known and what had been left behind. Rex shifted closer, his body angled forward, his breathing steady but focused, and then he let out a single, low sound, not a warning this time, but something closer to encouragement. As if the dog understood that this moment mattered in a way that words could not express, Ethan exhaled slowly and pulled. The movement was small at first, a faint lift, barely enough to break the seal, but it was enough. A soft sound followed, not loud, not sharp, just a quiet release, like air finding its way through a space that had been closed for too long, and the seam widened by less than an inch. The rhythm beneath them shifted again, not faster, not louder, but clearer, as though the opening had allowed it to reach the surface more fully. Ethan paused, holding the handle in place, feeling the slight vibration travel through the metal into his hands, and something inside him aligned with it, a recognition that did not come from logic, but from memory. He had felt something like this before, not here, not in this place, but somewhere else, in a different time, when listening for what could not be seen had meant the difference between moving forward and knowing when to stop. He tightened his grip and lifted again, this time with more force, and the metal responded, rising slowly, the edge of the hatch breaking free from the soil that had tried to claim it. Dirt fell away in small streams, revealing more of the surface beneath, a dull gray panel that extended deeper than he had first realized. Rex stepped back slightly, giving space, but his eyes never left the opening, his focus unwavering, as if whatever lay beneath was no longer hidden to him, only waiting to be revealed to Ethan. The hatch lifted another inch, then another, until a narrow gap formed along one side, just wide enough for the air below to escape. It rose slowly, carrying with it a scent that was faint but distinct, not decay, not danger, but something older, something enclosed, like a place that had been sealed away not to be forgotten, but to be preserved. Ethan leaned slightly, not enough to look inside, but enough to feel the change, the shift in temperature, the subtle difference between the open air above and the contained space below. Behind him, the mother dog took a few steps back, guiding her puppies further away from the opening, her movements calm but purposeful, as if she had brought them here to understand where not to return. Ethan noticed it without turning, sensing the distance she created, and it settled into his awareness as another piece of the truth unfolding around him. He lifted the hatch a little higher, just enough to secure it in place, and then he stopped, not because he could not open it further, but because something inside him told him that what came next required more than curiosity, it required understanding. The rhythm below continued, steady, patient, unchanged by his presence, and in that moment, Ethan realized that whatever lay beneath Hollow Creek had not been waiting to be discovered by chance. It had been waiting for someone willing to listen before they looked, someone who would not rush past the warning signs simply because they could not yet explain them. Sometimes, the first step toward the truth was not opening the door completely, but recognizing why it had been closed in the first place. Ethan held the hatch in its half-open position, the narrow gap breathing slowly against the still air as if the space below had been waiting for this moment to exhale, and for a long second, he did not move, his eyes fixed on the darkness beneath, not trying to see into it, but trying to understand it. The faint rhythm continued, clearer now, rising through the opening like a pulse carried through layers of time, steady and measured, and something about its consistency pressed against his memory in a way that refused to be ignored. He shifted his weight slightly and leaned closer, just enough for the dim outline below to begin to take shape, not in detail, but in suggestion. A narrow chamber, reinforced edges, surfaces that reflected faint traces of light, and then he saw it. A small panel embedded along the inner wall, its surface marked by a soft, intermittent glow, not bright, not harsh, but alive in a quiet, deliberate way. Rex stepped forward again, stopping just short of the opening, his ears angled sharply, his body still except for the subtle movement of his chest, and then he made a sound Ethan had not heard in a long time, a low, almost questioning tone, the kind that came when something familiar appeared in an unfamiliar place. Ethan's breath slowed as the recognition settled in, not fully formed, but undeniable, because the pattern, the glow, the structure beneath, it all aligned with something he had once known, something he had once been trained to observe, measure, and then leave behind. Without question, he closed his eyes briefly, and the memory surfaced, not as a complete picture, but as fragments, a sealed site, a quiet operation, instructions given in calm voices that never explained more than necessary, and the same kind of rhythm, The same kind of signal that had been described not as danger, but as containment, as something stable as long as it remained undisturbed. His eyes opened again, sharper now, and he looked back into the chamber with a different understanding. Not fear, not alarm, but awareness. Whatever this place had been, it had not been abandoned in the way people believed. It had been secured, left in a state that required distance, not attention. Rex lowered himself slowly onto the ground beside the opening, his posture steady, his gaze unwavering, as if he had already accepted what lay beneath, as if the truth did not unsettle him in the way it might unsettle a person. Behind them, the mother dog had moved even farther back now, her puppies gathered safely near her, their small forms calm, no longer restless, no longer uncertain, and Ethan understood why. She had not been fleeing something immediate, she had been creating space, distance from something that did not belong to the surface, something that was not meant to follow, but also not meant to be approached carelessly. Ethan adjusted his grip on the hatch and held it in place, resisting the urge to open it further, because the more he looked, the more he understood that what lay below was not a threat in motion, but a truth in waiting, something that had been contained for a reason, something that still held that purpose even now. The faint glow from the panel pulsed again. Subtle and consistent, and the rhythm matched it perfectly, a quiet synchronization that felt less like machinery and more like a system that had been designed to endure without interruption. Ethan drew a slow breath and stepped back slightly, releasing some of the weight from the hatch but keeping it from closing completely, his mind moving through the fragments of memory, connecting what he had seen before with what he was seeing now, and the realization settled in with a quiet certainty. This was not something new, not something that had emerged overnight. This was something that had always been here, hidden beneath Hollow Creek, maintained in silence, trusted to remain unnoticed. Sometimes, the most carefully kept secrets were not protected by walls or locks, but by the simple assumption that no one would think to question what lay beneath their feet. And as Ethan stood there with Rex beside him and the soft glow rising from below, he understood that the truth was not something that had just been discovered, it was something that had finally been recognized for what it was. Ethan remained standing at the edge of the opening, the weight of what he now understood settling into him not as fear, but as responsibility, the kind that did not come with orders or instructions, only with a quiet decision that had to be made without anyone telling him what was right. The soft glow from below continued its steady pulse, unchanged by his presence, unchanged by the years it had spent hidden beneath the town, and the rhythm that accompanied it remained calm, contained, almost patient, as if it had never expected to be disturbed, only maintained. He glanced back toward Hollow Creek in the distance, the rooftops barely visible beyond the rise of land, quiet and unaware, carrying on with the simple routines of a place that believed itself safe because it had forgotten what lay beneath it. Rex stood beside him again now, no longer tense, no longer searching, but watchful in a different way, as if the moment of discovery had passed and something else had taken its place, something steadier, something that required understanding rather than reaction. Ethan lowered his gaze back to the hatch in the narrow opening, considering the space below, the panel, the faint glow, the system that had continued without interruption, and he knew that opening it further would not give him answers in the way most people expected. It would only bring him closer to something that was meant to remain exactly where it was. The memory fragments returned again, clearer this time, instructions given without explanation, locations marked but never discussed, the understanding that some things were not meant to be fixed or removed, only monitored and respected. He exhaled slowly and shifted his grip, easing the hatch downward just slightly, not closing it, not sealing it again, but acknowledging its place, its purpose. Behind him, the mother dog had settled into the grass, her puppies curled close to her side, their small bodies finally at rest, their breathing slow and even, untouched by the quiet tension that lingered around the opening. And in that image, Ethan saw something simple and undeniable. They had left not out of panic, but out of instinct, out of a natural understanding that distance was sometimes the safest choice. He looked back at them for a moment, then returned his attention to the ground beneath his feet, the faint hollow, the subtle difference in the way the earth held itself above the hidden structure. And he realized that this place had never been dangerous in the way people feared, it had only been misunderstood, its silence mistaken for emptiness rather than containment. Rex sat down beside him, his posture relaxed but attentive, his gaze moving between Ethan and the opening, and then he let out a soft breath, the kind that carried no warning, no urgency, only a quiet presence. Ethan rested a hand on the dog's shoulder, grounding himself in that steady loyalty, and for the first time since he had followed the mother dog out of town, the unease that had settled into the morning began to shift, not disappearing, but changing into something clearer, something he could carry without being overwhelmed by it. He looked once more into the narrow gap, the soft glow, the steady rhythm, and then he made his decision, not to expose it, not to ignore it, but to respect it, to leave it as it had been intended, while ensuring that it would not be forgotten again. Sometimes, the truth did not ask to be revealed to the world, sometimes it only asked to be understood by someone willing to listen, and as Ethan slowly lowered the hatch back into place, leaving just enough space to know it was there, he understood that not every discovery needed to be shared to have meaning. Some were meant to be carried quietly, the way the earth carried its secrets, steady and patient beneath the surface. The hatch settled back into place with a quiet finality, the metal resting once again beneath a thin layer of earth as if it had never been disturbed, and yet Ethan knew that nothing about this place was the same anymore, not for him. Not for the quiet understanding that now lived beneath every step he would take across Hollow Creek. The faint rhythm did not disappear when the opening closed, it simply softened, returning to the background where it had always been, steady and patient, no longer demanding attention, only awareness. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, his eyes tracing the outline now barely visible beneath the soil, committing it to memory not as a location, but as a responsibility, something he would carry without needing to speak of it. Rex rose slowly from where he had been sitting, stretching once before stepping closer, his shoulder brushing lightly against Ethan's leg, a silent acknowledgement that whatever needed to be done had been done, and that the rest did not require urgency, only understanding. Ethan rested his hand briefly on the dog's back, feeling the steady warmth beneath the fur, grounding himself in something simple and certain, something that did not change even when everything else shifted beneath the surface. Behind them, the mother dog stood and nudged her puppies gently, guiding them once more toward the open land beyond the abandoned site, their small forms moving with a quiet confidence that had not been there before, as if the path ahead was no longer uncertain. Ethan watched them for a few seconds, noting the way the mother did not look back this time, not because she was unaware, but because she no longer needed to be, and there was something in that simple act that stayed with him longer than anything he had seen beneath the ground. He turned slowly, taking one last look at the rusted structures, the silent towers, the forgotten edges of a place that had once held purpose and still did in ways no one had chosen to remember, and then he stepped away. The walk back toward Hollow Creek felt different, not lighter, not heavier, but clearer, each step carrying a quiet sense of direction that had not been there before, as if the morning had shifted from uncertainty into something more grounded, something he could carry without needing to understand every part of it. Rex moved beside him with an easy rhythm, his earlier focus replaced by a calm attentiveness, his ears still aware, but no longer searching for what had already been found. As they reached the edge of town, the familiar sounds began to return, distant doors opening, a truck engine turning over, the subtle movements of people beginning their day, unaware of what rested beneath their routines, unaware of the quiet balance that held everything in place. Ethan paused for a brief moment at the rise where the town came fully into view, his eyes moving across the rooftops, the streets, the lives unfolding below, and he understood something then that did not come from memory or training, but from the simple act of standing there, seeing both what was visible and what was not. Some truths did not need to rise to the surface to matter, some only needed to be respected, protected in the quiet ways that never made headlines, never drew attention, but shaped the world all the same. Rex sat beside him, his gaze following Ethan's, and for a moment, the two of them remained there in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything that needed to be understood had already settled into place. Ethan exhaled slowly and turned toward the town, his steps steady, his posture unchanged, but something within him had shifted in a way that did not need to be seen. Sometimes, the greatest changes did not come from what was revealed, but from what was quietly kept, held with care, and carried forward without needing to be explained. And as he walked back into Hollow Creek with Rex at his side,